And his group, which is called the Spectacular Group, currently educates over 10,000 children each academic term. Welcome to my podcast, Transformational Conversations, where I speak to coaches, business owners and entrepreneurs on how challenging experiences in their life have provided huge transformational growth. This is so that we can all learn from these experiences and grow as a result. Enjoy the conversation. This episode, I have Adrian Knight. So Adrian is an accomplished acquisition entrepreneur and business turnaround expert. He's appeared in multiple publications on M&A, entrepreneurship and small business growth through acquisition. Adrian regularly speaks at national and international M&A conferences and has mentored more than 50 aspiring acquisition entrepreneurs on how to either grow their existing business through acquisition or how corporate professionals can change careers into small business ownership through acquisition. Adrian has used his acquisition skills to build a multi-million-pound children's education group from the ground up in less than 3 years. So, wow, what an experience and what a background you have in business and business acquisition as well. Can you tell me a little bit about your life and how you became to be such an expert in business acquisition?
Of course. And first of all, thank you for having me on your podcast. It's a real pleasure to be here, Spence. So, yeah, I mean, as for my background, I've been a lifelong entrepreneur, starting in my teenage years. That sort of went into my sort of 20s and early 20s, and I've spent the best part of my 20s starting businesses. But I wasn't very good at it. I had some entrepreneurial successes when I was in my teenage years, which gave me, I suppose, the confidence to sort of back myself. But as I sort of moved into the real world, I just couldn't seem to get a business off the ground. And in total, over my 20s, I had 12 failed startups, which is, any failed startup is soul destroying, but it was just one thing after the other. I just couldn't seem to get it working. Fast forward to just before I turned 30, and I thought, now's the time. I know this is in me. If I'm going to do this, I have to do it now, before I've got a family, before I've got any major commitments. And I started what turned out to be my most successful startup, in the sense that it didn't fail. I ran that for 7 years. I had a small group of people, a small group of team of employees. And enjoyed that time. But everything changed for me when I found out I was going to be a dad. And in sort of the lead up to, expecting a child for the first time, I personally spent a lot of time really assessing, who am I, where am I going, what type of dad do I want to be? And I realised very clearly that I couldn't continue the way I was. I've always seen myself as a very hands-on dad, even before, I had a child. But I just knew that was a role that I wanted to play. And that was really the segue into how I got started with business acquisition. Because after making that decision, it was literally a matter of months after, I acquired my first company, which was a 30-year-old national consultancy. That one acquisition, I bought that for £1. That doubled the size of my business. So I spent all of these years, like a whole decade, failing at startups, and then several years building my most successful startup. And then within a matter of months, I doubled the size of everything. And that was when the penny dropped for me and realised, wow, there is something to this. And that started a whole new journey.
That is a very powerful journey. And to have, leading back to what you said about your teenage successes, what were the successes in your teenage years that fueled you to then go into your 20s and go for startups again?
Yeah, I mean, I had two major ones, and they were basically back to back. So the first one was when I was 12. I was the biggest petrol head, and I still am to this day. I love my motorbikes. I love my cars, and I made a decision when I was 12 that I wanted to start saving for a car, even though I couldn't drive until I was 17. I made my dad take me to NatWest and open up a special account, which was called my car account. And then I started to hustle. But I found out that when you turn 13, you could get a paper round. And so I applied for this paper round and on the day after my 13th birthday, I get a call saying we've got a local round available. So I snapped that up, but I quickly realized that there was only so much I could earn from that. So I signed up for another one and then another one. So fast forward to when I was 15 and I had 5 paper rounds, but I wasn't actually delivering any of them. I had essentially franchised them out to my friends, and I was working in the main paper shop. So I had these 5 paper rounds which my friends and family were doing. I was working in the paper shop. Actually had quite a nice little side hustle there as well, because when you work all day on a Saturday, everybody comes in to buy their scratch cards, and by the end of the day you would know, well, which ones haven't paid out. So I'd get my wages on a Saturday and just take a couple of pounds and put it on a scratch card, and quite often would end up doubling my wages. But it works out quite well, because I ended up winning National Paperboy of the Year for Hampshire and got a brand new bike that unfortunately got stolen when I started university. So that was pretty cool. I was ironically in the paper, even though I wasn't actually delivering any papers myself. That sort of segued into my university. So I started my career after college. I went traveling, the first bit of traveling I'd ever done, and it was really the start of a whole different journey for me, as I've traveled a lot of the world. But I came back and started my career as a bricklayer's apprentice, which I'd done for about a year, but I just didn't like it. I wasn't very good. I just didn't
didn't it, man?
It was just like, for me, I realise now in hindsight, like all I've ever wanted to do is build. I just want to build stuff, and so that was a natural starting point for me. But I decided after the year that I wasn't going to continue with that. Very long story short, I ended up going to university in Reading, but I only lasted 3 weeks because I dropped out after 3 weeks because I realised this just wasn't. That's not how I'm going to spend my life. Like doing the same job for the next 40 years. But within those 3 weeks, I had started a student business, and so this was just before Facebook. And what me and a couple of mates, are like newly made mates, used to do, we'd go to the student nights, like on the nights out, we'd take loads of photos of everybody having a good time, hand out a business card on the dance floor. They would keep it. The next morning, they'd go to the business card, go to the website on the business card, and then be able to see all of their photos, which were uploaded. And then at the same time, we'd gone to local businesses like estate agents who wanted to target the student market and sold them advertising. So I'd managed to get that going in my freshers week. And after 3 weeks, decided to drop out of uni to pursue that. As it sort of evolved, I ended up staying at university for 3 years, and that little sort of student advertising evolved to the point where we were running 4 of the major student event nights in Reading per week. So we were promoting them and getting people into the different bars. We had student advertising. We had a paid weekly column in the Reading Chronicle, which had a readership of around 20,000 people. And we also started a charity called Student Watch off the back of some incident with a student girl getting attacked, which is still run today by Hampshire Constabulary. So it was quite a journey, like living the student life while not actually being a student. So that gave me quite going into my 20s, I felt reasonably confident in myself.
Yeah, I can understand why as well. It sounds like a really for me, that is the true entrepreneurial spirit. I mean, franchising out your paper round to five different, having 5 different paper rounds and then franchising them out, a genius idea, especially at the age of 12 and upwards. That's phenomenal. Really shows your entrepreneurial mindset and the way that you think as well. Really interesting, very interesting. So no wonder you had that drive, that tenacity, that business orientated mindset going into your 20s. So you said in your 20s you had 12 failed startups. What were the 12 failed startups as a overview, and what do you consider went wrong with them?
Yeah, it's so the actual businesses varied. They were there was a recruitment in there, there was training, there was marketing, there was e-commerce as well. In hindsight, and I've reflected on this a lot and spoken about this like quite a lot as well. What I sort of realised, and again with the benefit of sort of experience, is that I was a true, and am that true sort of visionary type thing. I was very good at sniffing out opportunities, seeing gaps in the market, being able to see where things go. But where I fell short spectacularly was once that initial vision was there and started to get some energy behind it, you then need to shift gears into more procedures and operations and systems and repeating the same things to be able to start building a business. And that was where I fell short every single time. It was more on the operational side of things. And even to this day, I stay out of operations in my businesses, which is great because I have a lot of like freedom and lifestyle. But I always say to people, it's for the benefit of the business, because as soon as I start getting involved, it will inevitably start to go downhill. So I could see the major gap. It wasn't the ideas, it wasn't even the opportunities that had been created. It was the ability to execute consistently on them. That was where I fell short, and I feel other entrepreneurs, not all of them, but a lot of entrepreneurs could probably relate to that in some shape or form.
Yeah. Is it? I speak to a lot of coaches, entrepreneurs, and business owners, and a lot of entrepreneurs have that drive for the very newness, the excitement, the beginning part of building a business, and creating that opportunity and starting to make money. And I think it's a very different mindset. You need to be more of an engineer to be able to, build the systems, build the processes that maintain that business and maintain the processes that fulfill the the financial obligations and the money coming in and everything else that the business needs on a regular basis. And then there's what you mentioned earlier about purchasing businesses and then integrating them into existing businesses as well. I think the way that an entrepreneur's mindset is able to integrate those two things and see the opportunities and see where they can merge together. I work with clients who do similar sorts of things as well. It sounds like you've meshed the best of both worlds with purchasing businesses and then looking for the opportunities and maybe 10xing them in some way, shape or form.
You've absolutely hit the nail on the head, because that has very much been the experience, is that the skills that being able to see the opportunity to really create buzz around it, and the drive and the tenacity and the creative problem solving, those skills lend extremely well to acquisitions. Because when you buy a business, there's no question about it, you're buying a bunch of problems. And part of the reason, often, not all the time, but in the large majority of the cases, part of the reason the seller or sellers are selling is because they want to, they're just done. They want to move away from those problems. And so being able to come in, to be able to rally everyone to see a vision and a future for something that hasn't been there for quite some time, and then to have the drive to be able to get people moving towards that is sort of the art. Certainly to turn around, it is the art. But then also it's knowing when to step back yourself, how to identify the right people and to put them in the right seat so they can take over the reins and really drive the business forward with that sort of consistent beating of the drum.
And I really like how you are very self-aware of your strengths and weaknesses. How do you find that affects your kind of day-to-day life? See a lot of people that aren't very self-aware and they keep repeating the same mistakes over and over again. And it sounds like you went through a period in your 20s with those 12 failed startups, like maybe repeating the same mistake several times in order to learn the lesson? How do you make sure that you're remaining self-aware when you're, looking for new businesses and new opportunities and things like that?
Yeah, it's such a big thing, and I'm always aware of how unaware I am about my awareness. Like a bit of a tongue twister there, but I've been journaling since I was 21 years old, and I literally have boxes and boxes of journals which have helped me to develop a strong sense of self-awareness, and not just externally but internally as well. Through my travels especially, I've developed a high degree of trust with my instincts. Like, I back myself. My instincts are telling me something when all the data and the facts says the opposite. I've learned to back the instinct, because not once has it let me down. So I rely very heavily on my instincts, watch out for those shortcomings, but I still get it wrong. I still get it wrong. My last acquisition turned out to be probably my biggest train wreck to date. And I've acquired 12 companies. They've not all been successes. I've had successes for sure. But equally, I've had my fair share of train wrecks, and my last one was the biggest train wreck. And I put that down to, in part, to my lack of self-awareness on the role I was playing. So yeah, you don't always get it right.
Yeah, and I think it's a really important point to make sure that we are learning from. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to get things wrong. But it sounds like you've got a strong connection with your intuition and your gut as well. I think a lot of people tune out of what their gut's telling them sometimes. I think more people would benefit from trusting their gut and their intuition. If it doesn't feel right, then maybe it's not right. But it sounds like you're learning from your experiences as well, which is an important part of our personal growth and personal development as well. So we met on a men's retreat earlier this year, back in April. We went to Crete with a group of men, and we kind of connected and chatted a little bit about what you've been doing, your family situation. And I was quite surprised to hear that you've been through a bit of a challenging time over the past year. Quite a lot's happened with regards to obviously your business, your family, your life situation as well. So can you give me some highlights? Just let the listeners know what's been happening over the past year or so.
Yeah, absolutely. So had a great time in Crete, and it was great to meet yourself. It really was. It was such a good week, and it was much needed for me, because the last 18 months have without question been the most challenging of my life. And it started in Easter of last year, so Easter 2023, which was when the acquisition I mentioned. My last acquisition was around 2 million in revenue, had 10 people in it. It was definitely a turnaround, but even though we'd done a lot of due diligence, I'd underestimated just how far gone that business was. And the signs for that, the first fatal signs, started to show in Easter last year, when we missed a large client didn't pay their invoice, which started a chain reaction. That very same weekend, so this was on Easter Friday, that very same weekend, my mother-in-law, so my wife, we were due to be married a couple of months later. My mother-in-law was taken into hospital and unfortunately never came out. She passed away, it was about 6 weeks before our wedding. Then the week of our wedding, my younger sister called me up in tears, saying that she had been diagnosed with breast cancer, and she was terrified because the cannula in her arm was showing in her wedding dress, and she didn't want to say. And within a space a couple of weeks, all of we can get married, there was 4 people very close to me who announced they had cancer diagnosis. One of them was my non-executive, who I'm very, very close with. And so it was all quite a shock. But the acquisition I had made had started to take a real downturn. I tried to save the business by doing something called a Phoenix. So you sort of save the good bits and put into another one. That showed some signs of working, and then it felt like life and the universe was just like completely against going down this path. Like the most bizarre things were happening just all around, and it was a big wake up call for me personally. But that had ramifications, that acquisition, because off the back of that, I had two very, very heated legal disputes. I nearly went bankrupt off the back of it. That sort of dragged into Christmas, and then early 2024. So we was on the retreat in April, and this was in January. The other groups in my company, they were bailing out the situation with this failed acquisition. So those what were previously healthy companies started to take quite a steep decline. I personally lost just over £300,000 of cash, and then just when I thought it was all over, I had a cancer scare myself, and in fact was why I left the retreat. It was a couple of days early because I had an appointment first thing with a skin specialist who basically told me that we need to get this out. And so all of that, like, I mean, several major life events happening within the space, some of them within the space of weeks, but certainly within a period of 12 months, it changed me very deeply. And the only other thing I'd say to that was, so I'm really big into my endurance, and I've got to the stage where I do quite a lot of extreme endurance events. So last year I was in the Arctic Circle on an expedition, and in March of this year it was just over 2 weeks of expedition going from the west coast of Panama across the country to the Caribbean coast. So we've done a coast to coast trek, and included just over a week of being in the jungle unsupported. And that was probably the hardest thing I'd ever done in my life. It was insane, but that was when I looked at what turned out to be that sort of cancer scare, and I was like, you need to get this sorted. So that, yeah, it all happened at once.
Wow, that is a hell of a lot of challenges and difficult situations and bereavements, and it sounds like you really went through the mill on that during that sort of 18-month period. How did you manage to stay focused and positive, and maintain, like you said earlier, to back yourself and to know that you were going to be successful and come out of it positively as well?
Yeah, I mean, there's two things that I think sort of saved me in some sense. The first was my morning routine. So I was getting up at 4 a.m. and I was reading, I was meditating, and then I was hitting the gym, and I was working out hard. And physically, I was, ironically, probably in the best condition of my life. And those first few hours of the day, from 4 to 7 a.m., they sort of saved me, really, because it was time of the day when I could just focus on myself before inevitably all of the shit would start. Around 6:30, 7 o'clock, my phone would be going off, and it was all just like none of it was good news. It was all just crap that needed to be sort of dealt with, and a lot of confrontation and everything else. And then on top of that, having a young daughter, getting home from the gym and going straight into dad mode as well, and still trying to be present for her and for everyone else. That morning routine really saved me. But also, I've always been, I say always, there's a spiritual part to me that has grown since my early 20s, to the point now where it's such a big part of me. Like, I'm a very spiritual guy. I'm not religious, but I've undoubtedly believe in, it's not just us. There is a higher power orchestrating things, and taking the time to self-reflect and to contemplate, I felt like, even though it was the worst thing that was happening, ironically, it was also the best thing. And to some degree, I felt I say this lightly, but I felt an element of, I'm really blessed to be going through this experience, even though it's terrible, because this is really changing things, and I don't know where it's leading. I certainly didn't know at the time, but I could just sense that this was something I'd look back on with a great degree of appreciation once I was out of the coal face and sort of going from baptism by fire to baptism by fire.
It certainly sounds like there was a lot of fire during that 18 months. Wow, man. Like to hear what you went through is a lot of people would have really, really struggled through that period. But it sounds like your morning routine, your practices, your journaling, your meditation, your physical exercise and endurance as well. Sounds like it was really kind of you keeping you on track, knowing that you were going to come out of it positively. And also, I think like what you described there about having some kind of like faith. You said it's not religious, and I understand what you mean by that. I'm quite spiritual too, but again, don't believe in a particular, religion or particular, what some people refer to as God.
Mm.
I also believe and have faith in some kind of higher power that's guiding us to our most positive outcome. So yeah, we will go through challenges, we will go through difficult times, life will throw stuff at us, which there's going to be pain, there's going to be struggles, there's going to be things like bereavement which hurt at the time, there's going to be a lot of things that we come into contact with. But like you said, it's about having some kind of faith in the knowledge that there is something looking out for us, something on the horizon that is better for us. And whether that's, an easy life or a challenging life, I think depends on, how much work we're doing on ourselves, because life will keep throwing challenges at us until we learn that lesson, like we spoke about earlier.
I completely agree.
So how old is your daughter now? You said you have a daughter and...
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
She's 5.
I also have a daughter. She's 9 now. So I know, the age of 5-year-old little girl is beautiful. Such an innocent and curious and beautiful age for them to be out there, just like sponges. They just absorb everything, the good and the bad. They just repeat a lot of our patterns, and it's really beautiful to see that.
It's so true. I'm amazed actually just how much she picks up without anything being said verbally, like purely from like watching, or even if I say something like a throw off comment and she'll bring it up like days later and I'll be like, I'm like, what? Yeah, just fascinated.
Always listening.
Yeah, and watching.
And it sounds like the birth of your daughter was almost like a pivotal point in your life as well. I think a lot of people go through that when they have children. A boy becomes a man when you have children, because you are then more responsible for something outside of yourself, and you're creating a life for someone, not just yourself or not just your partner. It's for a being that you're bringing into this world and creating a future for them as well.
And that's just it. So with Evie, she undoubtedly, it's so ironic because I spent my 20s completely avoiding relationships because I didn't want to be tied down until I had more of a substantial like footing and like foundation, and I failed. And then when we found out it was having Evie, like that was the turning point in which everything I'd been working for came together. It was so ironic, but Evie undoubtedly got me started on the path to acquiring companies, and was absolutely the chief inspiration officer for starting the children's business. And that started because I was going to baby classes, really enjoying like doing that, but looking around and realizing that it just didn't feel right. It felt like the people running those were more interested in getting bums on seats than the child's development. And that started the journey for me, where I decided I wanted to play a part in that sector purely for the kids. I'm more surprised than anyone to see how it sort of panned out, like just 24 months later, educating, sort of tens of thousands of under 5-year olds and being a multi-million revenue group. That was all inspired by Evie, but equally so was like some of the changes, because like changes in my personal life, because when the like the proverbial shit hit the fan with that acquisition, that was part of my children's group, and I had to really, it really caused me to wake up and to look at things. And I was living what I thought was my dream. We had a beautiful house in the country. We had a beautiful office, a big 2-story barn conversion, like out in the countryside. I would take my dog there. It was just idyllic, but I was absolutely miserable, and I was completely miserable. And I was like, this doesn't make any sense, because on the surface, I've done everything I said I would. But then I realized that, again, going back to Evie, I was like, what's the point? Like, I'm not there. Like, I'm not there. I'm away from home a couple of nights a week, and I'm like, yeah, like, what's the point? So the same way as she got me started, she almost sort of brought me back in some way to, yeah, like constantly causing me to reassess priorities and values, and making decisions based on what's best, like for me and for her, and family. So.
Yeah, I really feel as though that highlights what kind of a man you are, what kind of a father you want to be as well. I'm very similar in that way. I want to be present in their upbringing. I want to be an influence in their life. And I really liked your title for her, Chief Inspiration Officer.
Yeah, it's an
You
official
got that
role
on her
within the
bedroom
business.
door as a plaque.
That's it. But I remember when everything was going started to go wrong, and I really started to realize that like the implications of this business going wrong. I literally asked her, she's 4 years old, and I asked her, she's 3 years old. I was like, sort of, do you want daddy here? Do you want daddy to go and build it? I've literally asked her, and of course her answer was she wants her daddy, which what little boy or girl doesn't want their daddy? And it just reinforced to me. So
exactly, I love that. And sometimes when I'm with my daughter, I don't see them as a child. I see them as a small human that hasn't got the experience that we have. And yes, they are. I feel as though they're so much more tuned into their intuition than we can be sometimes, because they haven't had the conditioning of school, of television, of parents, society, all those things. They're just so like pure and driven by inspiration and intuition. I love that.
Yeah, I've definitely observed that.
Exactly. So going back to when you were going through your 18-month challenging period, the business wasn't going very well, and you'd received the cancer diagnosis. Obviously, I feel as though when we're going through, difficult business problems, it's almost like they're slightly outside of us, and we can, find a path through that. But when we receive some kind of like something internal that really kind of affects how we feel, and that can be like a cancer scare or a diagnosis or something like that. How do you feel that affected your the way that you felt and the way that you were living your life as well?
Yeah, it's I mean, it was a cancer scare, and they done a biopsy, and it come back with like it was right to get it out. But there was a I mean, it was what, 2-3 week period when I was really unsure about the severity of it, and all in the sort of context in the backdrop of my younger sister at that point had 12 round of chemos plus surgery, plus she was the other side of surgery. She had 3 young children. Like, it just doesn't, in your mind, it doesn't happen. That's, your younger sister in her mid-30s getting cancer to that degree. It doesn't happen. So I wasn't taking anything for granted, and all I could really think about was what what was I leaving Evie, not in terms of like financial stuff, because actually I've lost a lot of my financial stuff anyway because of the business that had gone down. So that played a part of my thought process, but it was more so what type of dad would she remember me as, and what sort of value have I added. And I said, like, up until that point, there had been a lot of very valid reasons of why I was feeling unhappy. Like in general, like, a lot of stuff. Like it's just been a horrendous like year at that point, going through absolutely horrendous. So naturally, you're not going to be feeling great. But I just felt that there was something deeper in the lead up to it. I felt that there was something deeper bothering me, and as I started to get rid of stuff, so like the office went, I was around the home a lot more. I was addressing the things that I thought were making me unhappy. I realised that undercurrent of happiness was still there, and if anything, it was becoming more prominent. And so when with that cancer scare, it just made me realise, like, you literally cannot take anything for granted, and it is life is far too short to be able to live it unhappily. And also to add to this, like with a backdrop that has played a significant part, is that my parents separated a couple of years prior after 43 years of being together. And I've since found out my dad on the 60th birthday decided that he didn't want to continue living the way that he had been, and that had played a big part in it, in everything as well. Just sort of realizing, like, you literally cannot take anything for granted. And so that started a sort of a journey for me, a personal journey of starting to, like, everything had been turned inside out, but there was still like dregs at the bottom of the keg. Is like, right, let's get in there and really get deep.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you were reassessing your whole life purpose and starting to, discard and clear out the things that you didn't feel as though were making you happy, almost like you were chasing happiness, or not chasing, but like driving towards happiness, and clearing out all of the things that didn't really serve you. So what was it like when you came to the realization that your parents didn't want to be together, and that they had been together for a number of years prior to that?
So we've always, well, I have to choose my words now, because so we've always been a very close family, but in hindsight, we grew up thinking we was a very close family, but in hindsight, you could see that my parents weren't happy in their marriage. And when it all kicked off, I sort of jumped in, like being the rescuer. Not the first time I'd done that. In like 10 years previously, it almost happened again, and I literally called a marriage counsellor to arrange an appointment and sort of frog marched both my parents off, and that sort of served as a sticky plaster to it. So this time round, I jumped right into the middle, and it was different, because I threw myself into the crossfire of essentially 43 years of resentment, bitterness, anger, frustration, everything in between. And it I didn't realize at the time, but it deeply impacted myself. Ironically, speaking with my younger sister a couple of years after the event, we both agreed of, like, we came at this from our own sort of independent conclusions, but in many ways, even though we had a happy childhood, we also feel like it was an illusion to some degree, because my parents were staying together for the kids, but we had clearly subconsciously picked up that they weren't happy. And it was only since the separation that we both felt, my sister and I, that we were starting to get to know our parents for the very first time, with both of them being in their 60s. And that left a very permanent etching on me that really struck a chord with me. And sort of going back to sort of the cancer scare and everything else, I just knew there was no way Evie's not going to know her dad. Like, you know, she's going to know her dad. Like, I may not be the best dad, I may not, do all of these other things, but there's one thing that will be said is that she will know like who I am as a person, and equally I will know who she is, and I will live my life in a way for her to model. And it was just completely unacceptable to me to, if I was unhappy, to carry on being unhappy and not to address it, because as we said earlier in the call, was the kids model what you do. And I was like, subconsciously, she's going to pick up on that. And it was just completely unthinkable for me.
Yeah, totally. I really hear you on that. And I went through a very similar situation where I didn't want my daughter to model an unhappy father, because like you said, and we spoke earlier, children model their parents, whether we like it or not. It's not a case of do what I say. They literally do what we do. They mimic how we respond to emotions. They mimic how we react in situations. They mimic how we, respond positively and negatively. So being the kind of person it sounds like you are, where you're, always striving for doing the right thing, living positively, exercising, giving yourself, difficult challenges in life and learning from them as well, is giving your chief inspiration officer inspiration for her life, to do similar things. She can't not become that person that you are inspiring her to become.
That's just it. And I'm really I often just watch her behavior and what she's doing and think, okay, so these are the things she's picking up on. So at the moment she's just got a new desk in her playroom, and she's got a little briefcase has got all the colouring pens in, and she's always talking about how she's going off to work and sitting down at her desk, and she loves it. But I'm thinking she's seeing too much of that side of me at the moment. It's reflecting back, I'm like, I need to do that. So particularly over the summer, we've because I do a lot of these these endurance events have gotten quite extreme, and the story to Evie is always Daddy's going on one of his adventures. So we spent a lot of time out in the parks and different places, climbing and going on our own adventures to sort of bring out that sort of side in her, and her confidence has come on so much from just that, and I'm more proud of that than the work stuff. So yeah.
Mate. Yeah, and I think children, like I said earlier, mimic us no matter what we do. So making sure that we're giving them the image that we want to, as well as inspiring them, is a really important part of their growth and development. I make sure, and I'm sure you're probably the same, that my grandparents, my parents, have a big influence on their lives as well. It's a really important part of their upbringing to have that family support as well.
100%. Yeah, I mean, we were just at my mum's over the weekend, actually, a couple of days ago, and just making sure they know how much they're loved and supported and cherished, even if they don't see them every day. Just knowing that's I'm always do that, and even with myself, I sometimes I've turned around to Evie and tell her I love her, and her response is, "I know," because I'm always telling her. But I also, I also am very clear on having boundaries as well. So I try to keep it as balance. Daddy does say no, but it doesn't mean he doesn't love you.
Yeah, important. I think that's so important. I speak to quite a few people who are what might be referred to as new age parents, where their boundaries are very lax, and just let the children, maybe even do child-led upbringing. I find that doesn't instill a sense of discipline, and maybe they might have low boundaries or lack of boundaries in their life when they're a little bit older. I think it's really important to understand what our boundaries are, where our yeses and nos are, and where they might be in the future as well.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same. So I didn't have any boundaries really when I was younger, and it was only through a couple of bad relationships where I realised, oh wait a minute, like boundaries. And now I feel like I've got very strong boundaries. I'm very happy to say no, and not to shy away from that. That's been something that's just developed over time. But also I saw with my parents, my dad didn't have that strong boundaries, and I felt that contributed to some of the disputes. And so it's boundaries are always front and center of my mind with a lot of stuff, even with like the dog as well. Absolutely adore the dog, but there are very clear boundaries, and like Evie knows that as well. And I find there's a really nice middle ground there. You can be, you can have the boundaries, but it doesn't mean you have to be mean or anything. It's just yeah.
It's being able to express our boundaries in a confident and assertive way that doesn't, you don't need to assess, we don't need to express boundaries in a aggressive or, in a way that affects the other person or gets a reaction from the other person. It's just, this is my boundary. This is where I'm comfortable being. This is where things are going to go for us or for me. I think that's a really important part of our growth as men as well. So with regards to your cancer diagnosis or your cancer scare, what have you changed in your life since that point in order to ensure that that doesn't happen again? Obviously, you said you were what I refer to as chasing or driving towards happiness by casting off lots of different things about you, but have you changed anything in your health routine or your environment or your life that's specifically to make sure that that doesn't happen again to you?
The cancer scare was in many ways the final straw. I think that was the straw that broke the camel's back after sort of the backdrop of like the previous year at the time. And what I realised from about myself, because there were some weeks there when I was genuinely unsure how things would pan out, and seeing how things had panned out with my sister, I was like, I really don't know which way the dice are going to fall here. But what I realised, and the insight I had, was that, and I've always felt this, but it crystallised for me, was that I wasn't actually afraid of like dying, but I was terrified of not living. And I've always had that. I've always had that like undercurrent to me, and it's come out in many different ways, like through travels. I've traveled nearly 50 countries. I've lived a lot of life, but even like, yes, going back to that point, I was thinking, I'm just terrified of not living a life, like a full life, but a life that was like authentic to me. And so, as sort of the weeks went on, I started to see my myself, like my mental health, really deteriorate in quite a big way. I was becoming, at home, I was just horrible to be around. We wasn't really talking, not being aggressive or anything like that. I just wasn't, very like in my shell. Started to take a big downhill spiral. Even the dog and the cat didn't like to be around me, and I just couldn't figure out why I was feeling like that. Because, well, on the surface, everything was okay. There wasn't cancer, nothing to, serious to worry about there. Lived in a beautiful house and all of this other stuff. And I realized that I wasn't happy in my relationship. Being newly married, so we've been married just coming up to a year at that point, and I realized that I just wasn't happy on a very deep level, which started to open up a bit of a Pandora's box, because I wasn't expecting to go there. There was always very valid reasons why I was feeling that undercurrent of unhappiness, such as, the business this or the business that, or I'm up in the offices, which were nearly 3 hours away, so away from home. There was always valid reasons, but all of those reasons had gone. Like, it got rid of the offices, stuff like this. They had all gone, and yet I felt worse than ever. And I realised it was, the relationship, and not so much my wife, but more me in that relationship. I didn't I didn't want that, and I could see the path I was going down, and I didn't want that either. And so it ultimately sort of came to a head when I decided to separate from my wife, which was, well, I think as with most people when they go through that experience, it's terrifying, because all I could think about was I'm not going to be a weekend dad, sitting with my daughter at McDonald's for a couple of hours a week. That's like all I could think about was my little girl. And I was like, it's completely unacceptable for me. Like, there's just no way that's going to happen. So I felt like, yeah, I was sort of between a rock and a hard place, but ultimately I had to do what was right for me, because I had seen by not doing what was right, staying at home, I just deteriorated to the point where, yeah, not even the dog and the cat wanted to be around me. And Evie was absolutely picking up on it, and I was like, that's not acceptable.
Wow.
I have to do something.
I think when your children or even your pets are mirroring the situation that you're in, it really gives you a reflection of, I need to change something here. Something's not right. So it sounds like you're really, really tuned into what's going on. I was having a conversation with somebody at the weekend about how there's a lot of films and media and society in general gives us the idea that we, in order to have a successful life, there's this fairy tale experience, which is meet a partner, get married, have children, buy a house, not necessarily in that order, but there's like certain aspects of life which we need to, tick box off of our to-do list in order to have a happy life. And then when we achieve those things, or when we are in that situation where we've got a partner, a child, a house, a fast car, whatever it is, two pets, a dog and a cat, and we're still not happy, we then start to reassess what life is all about. And it sounds like you went through that period. I went through something very similar as well, and started to realize that, what do I actually want from my life? I probably went through something similar to, it sounds like, what you went through, where instead of growing together, we actually grew apart. When I was in my relationship, we grew apart. I started to do a hell of a lot of personal development over a period of time, and we just went, we started off very similar and together, and we enjoyed all the same things and had a great time together. But unfortunately, over a period of time, we grew apart, and it got to a stage where, very similar to you, it wasn't. I wasn't happy in the relationship, and decided to make that decision. So what was the hardest part about making the decision to split with your wife?
I think it was the self-acceptance. So I had, for a long time, I bottled it up and hadn't really discussed it, but then I started to discuss it with my wife about where I was at. And I mean, the environment at home was awful. Not in a, it was just like long periods of silences, avoiding each other, or probably more accurately, me avoiding everyone else. Agreed that I'd go away for a few days, stay in a hotel, and get my head sorted. But I'd also made it clear, and my wife had acknowledged this as well, that this wasn't some like overnight thing that, go away for a night, come back and everything's fine. So I left the home. I packed a small bag full of clothes, and my wife quite rightly wanted to know, does my future like involve them or not? Is it that? And I always felt that was like, I completely understood what she was saying, but of course it involves them. Like, we've got a little girl together, like it or not, we're in each other's lives for the next 20 odd years. And like, my wife is like, there's no abuse, nothing like that. She is a great person, which made it even harder. And it was even more of a mind spin, because I'm like, this, what's going on, like stuff like that. But the hardest part was accepting to myself. It was when I made the final decision. So I went away, I stayed in hotels for about a week, and just was going back and forth. And I pulled together a very small group of people there was 4 people who I spoke to about the situation, specifically like where I was at and what I was doing, and they all had different points of view and perspective, but all of them had a shared commonality in that they had gone through like separations at various points in their lives, and that really helped me to get a lot of perspective on things. So I trying not to get too stuck in my head, but it was when I actually decided, it was the hardest thing, but also at the same moment, it was like the weights came off my shoulders, and I felt like a balloon going up. I felt completely liberated from a lot of things because I'd made a decision, but then I was also very mindful of, right, you're about to go into a very different journey that I genuinely had no, like even a couple of months before, I never would have thought like would be going down that path. But
yeah, man, and I had a very similar experience. That it took a long time for me to come to the decision of what I refer to as breaking up that family unit, breaking that fairy tale of, I want to stay together for my daughter so that she has a stable mother and father. When in actual fact, our relationship now is just so incredible, and it's changed and evolved so much over the last 3 or 4 years. It's been the most powerful thing that I could have done, and one of the unfortunately one of the best decisions I ever made, but also one of the toughest as well.
Yeah, I completely feel that, because that whole thing of staying together for Evie, well, I just seen my parents do that for 43 years. And in the lead up to it, I asked my dad, I asked him when he first felt like he might not be happy and wanted to do that. And I said to him, I was like, my gut tells me I was a child, like 3 or 4 years old. And his answer was, he said, actually, he was 2 years old. And I was like, you stayed together all of those years for me and my sister. And he's like, yeah. And he's like, it wasn't all bad times, but like I'd been saying for a long time, they should have split up decades ago. And so that whole piece of staying together for the kids, or, the child, was just non-existent for me, because I had lived that as the child. And it wasn't even a question of staying together for the benefit of Evie. It was more a question of, I'm not being pushed out of her life. Not saying that my wife would ever do that, but you never know. You never know. I certainly didn't know then. I'm not being pushed out of that little girl's life. She needs her daddy, and her daddy if I'm honest, her daddy needs her as well. And I'm going to be there. So
it sounds as though the decision that you made, well, I suppose in some ways, it sounds as though you modelled what your parents had gone through to some extent, but then come to the realisation that actually modelling that happiness for your daughter is more important than perpetuating that fairy tale, family situation.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't even a fairy tale for me. Like I've got friends who remember me in my 20s remember me saying that I didn't even know if I want to be married. Like I've always, this thing, I've never seen that as, as my path, and I've always sensed it. And for many different reasons, ended up in that situation, only to realise that it wasn't ultimately what I wanted. It wasn't the structure that I felt was going to make me happy. And the problem was there was nothing else to model. Like I'd only ever seen that, oh well, your parents are together and stuff like that. I'd only ever seen that. I didn't realise there were other ways to live your life, and to some degree I still don't. I'm sort of figuring this out. But it was only when so one of the 4 people I spoke to was a mutual friend of ours, actually, who was also on the retreat, and he had separated with his wife when he had young children. And like speaking with him, he helped me to see what life could be like after that. And he spoke about how the relationship with his daughters was just extremely tired. I had all these incredible experiences, and it made me start to realize that I could also have that with Evie, because I would be more present. Like I may not be there living in the same roof, under the same roof the whole time, but when she is with her dad, she's got her dad, and she's seeing far more of that. And to date, and I don't want to jinx it, but that is how things have panned out. Our relationship it's stepped up so much. It's just I feel like it's accelerating in many ways, compared to maybe what it could have been.
And it sounds like, because of the transformation, because of the experience, because of your decisions and your confidence and bravery to do what you do, she is receiving a more authentic and better quality version of you, and experience of inspirational version of what a father can be to her.
Yeah, it feels like that. And even with my wife, so we're still married. Like we're not together, but legally we're still married. And even with her, it's I feel like she gets a much better version of me, probably than she's ever had in many ways. And the thing is, I'm not really trying. It's just coming out authentically and stuff like that. And that's helped a lot. Like I've not seen my wife, like, in all honesty, I've not seen her as happy as what I have done over the last months than I have for years. Which makes you think, oh, was I that bad? But then I don't even know if that's it. I just feel like we're all maybe just living a bit more authentically. That's what it feels like. So
Exactly. The highest version of ourselves is to
yeah.
be our authentic selves.
Yeah.
How did you manage your relationship with your daughter and wife after the experience? How did you maintain and manage your own internal world, and also manage theirs as well, to make sure that they're in balance and congruent, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very lucky because my wife is extremely pragmatic, and like most mums, she absolutely, adores Evie. And we said right at the very beginning that I said, like, we're in each other's lives the next 20 years, and we both agreed that maintaining a friendship was, like, absolutely vital for the benefit of Evie, and getting hostile isn't going to do anyone any favors here. So that was the context. Yeah, it's been an emotional journey, I guess. The first thing I'd done was I set myself up in a apartment that's not too far from like the family home and from school. So my criteria was how long would it take me to do the school run from where I am, but also making sure it's a nice environment. So Evie wants to come here. When I first got the place, even my wife came over to see it out. Wanted her to come over to see the environment so she could see where Evie would be. And we very quickly, like, we was quite lucky. I was quite lucky in some ways because we were just going into the summer holidays. So, like it or not, we had at the time a 4-year-old at home for the summer, not at school. We're both working, so we had to figure it out. And there's no way my wife could have that all on her shoulders. So we very quickly got into a routine where we're essentially co-parenting. So I've got Evie half of the week, and she's with my wife the other half of the week. And even then, like, it's not set in stone. Like, there's been a few things, of a couple of unexpected hospital visits on my wife's side. So I'm straight over there, like, looking out for Evie. So we've managed to or started this journey, I guess, of rebuilding a relationship between ourselves there for the benefit of Evie, but also for the benefit of ourselves. We've even had, a couple of times, like, what was it, on Evie's birthday, I stayed over for the night, like, stayed in the sofa bed in the playroom, and my wife and I had a curry together, like, got curry, stuff like that. So we're trying to keep it as normal and as amicable as it can be, and it seems to be working. But I'm still so early into the journey. I don't want to jinx it, or I'm conscious of what I don't know. So
Exactly. And it's only going through the experience that's going to give you the experience of what's going to happen. What a lucky girl your daughter is to have a father like you, who's been so honourable and genuine and inspirational for her to model, because that's all she's going to be able to do. She's going to want to get into a relationship with somebody like you in her later on in life, you know, when that time comes, she'll be looking for a man that exhibits all of the qualities that you are exhibiting to her in that relationship. And that's what drives me to be the best version of myself for my daughter, so that she models who I am, what I'm showing her, what I'm teaching her, how I am, how I react, how I respond. And it sounds like you're doing exactly the same thing. To be self-aware enough to be able to witness your daughter mirroring those things back to you is a really powerful way of living our lives.
Not really considered it from that perspective. It's a great point. I've not considered it of living from your higher self, so that she models that when she looks for a partner when she's older. But I completely agree with the point. I'm like, yeah, it's absolutely true. And if anything, just adds more incentive to not even to be better, because it implies that you're coming from a place of lack, but just
self-improvement, isn't it? It's just looking for better ways and more ways to improve our lives and improve our expression of ourselves, so that we're more authentic in what we're doing and what we're showing to other people as well.
I think authentic is the key word there. So a few years ago, I when we was on holiday, I defined what success meant to me. So my definition of success, and for me, it's to be my integrated, authentic self. That for me is what I deem as being successful, and that was what I felt I wasn't fully doing, certainly, you know, previously, and I feel so much more closer to that. Although there's still more to do there, like to be even more authentic, and I don't even know what it is yet. I to sense it, but that is the example I want to leave for my daughter, is to live a life that's true to her, not what others are imposing on her, whether that's her mum or dad, or, you know, her friends or society. And if that means not being in a sort of a typical marriage of 2.4 kids, you know, that I'm sort of like broad brush, then it's okay to not do that.
Exactly, that's it. And leading by example is the highest form of authenticity, I feel. So we're kind of coming to the end of our time together now. What's been your biggest insight from the last 18 months or in the last year that you might want to share with our viewers?
There's been so many. There's two that comes to mind. The first one is that authenticity piece. Being authentic to yourself is everything. That in and of itself is what I believe is to be successful. And if that means making some quite big or hard changes, then that is clearly something that has to be faced and addressed. But the other insight that's come from that is, when you do that, something seems to happen where, like for me, a lot of pieces just fell into place. And I started to observe, the more I feeling so overwhelmed by circumstances of everything happening all at once, the more I let go of trying to control everything, the more took on a life of their own almost, and started to work themselves out. I feel humbled by the experience, because take the relationship with my wife, there's no way in a million years I thought things would ever evolve to the point where they have. It's from a good perspective, but it was that willingness to let go and just trust the circumstances and to go with it that has proved to have been fantastic. So it's been authentic, and just sort of letting go and trusting that things will work out for your highest good.
I love that. And authenticity is one of my core values. I've got on my wall in my office.
Oh, yeah.
I've got 4 core values, and one of them is authenticity. It's such an important and integral part of my life and my journey as well, to be authentic in how we express ourselves, how we experience life, what we enjoy, what we don't enjoy, and being able to communicate that as well is such an important part. And like you said, letting go of anything that doesn't serve us, as anything that's inauthentic to us, is a really important part of our spiritual development, I feel.
I love that. I'm exactly the same. My authenticity, courage, adventure, integrity, they are my highest values. As I love Yeah.
Mine are power, individuality, courage, and authenticity. So very
Yeah,
similar.
that's awesome.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Love it. I have really, really enjoyed this conversation today. I feel as though I've gained a lot of insight into your life, your challenges, your business experience, your family, your journey, your decisions, everything that's kind of like brought you to this point in your life. And I really, really enjoyed having our conversation today.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It's it's an absolute honor to be here, and I'm just so excited to see how this podcast continues to pan out for you, Spence. I really am.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being a guest.